The school auditorium buzzed with the restless energy of students waiting for entertainment rather than meaning. Rows of plastic chairs creaked under shifting bodies, whispers floated through the air, and the smell of cheap popcorn mixed with dust and old curtains. It was the annual talent show, an event most students treated as a break from classes, a chance to laugh, cheer, or secretly mock anyone brave enough to step onto the stage. Backstage, near the heavy maroon curtains, stood a man in a faded blue uniform. His clothes smelled faintly of cleaning solution, and his hands were rough, cracked from years of scrubbing floors no one noticed unless they were dirty. He was the school janitor. Many students walked past him every day without seeing him, or worse, seeing him only as part of the building, like a broom or a mop. Today, though, every eye seemed to land on him, not with respect, but with curiosity and quiet judgment. Holding his hand tightly was a small girl, no older than 12. Her hair was neatly braided, tied with a simple white ribbon. Her eyes, pale and unfocused, stared into nothing. She was blind. She stood calmly, her posture straight, as if she could sense the size of the room beyond the curtains. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the noise, laughter, whispers, and the sharp sting of being talked about. "Why is the janitor here?" Someone in the front row muttered loudly enough to be heard. "Isn't this a talent show?" Another voice snickered. "What talent does she even have?" A group of older students near the aisle laughed openly now, nudging each other and glancing toward the stage. One of them pulled out a phone, already preparing to record what they clearly expected to be a joke. Behind the curtain, the man swallowed hard. He had begged the coordinator for weeks to let his daughter perform. He had filled out forms he could barely read, stood in lines where people looked past him, and endured sighs of impatience. This moment was the result of every humiliation he had accepted silently. Yet standing there now, hearing the laughter, doubt crept into his heart like a slow poison. Maybe this was a mistake. A teacher walked by, her polite smile strained. "Are you sure she's ready?" she asked, her tone careful but heavy with doubt. "The audience can be harsh." The janitor nodded, unable to find words. His throat felt tight. He looked down at his daughter, hoping, praying, she would say she wanted to stop. That she wanted to go home. That would make it easier. Instead, she squeezed his hand. "Abu," she said softly, her voice steady despite the noise. "I know they're laughing." His heart broke a little. "We can leave," he whispered. "You don't have to do this." She shook her head gently. "I've practiced for this. Please. Just one chance." The coordinator's voice echoed through the microphone. "Next up, we have a vocal performance." There was an awkward pause. Papers shuffled. "By Aisha." The laughter grew louder at the mention of her name. Some students clapped sarcastically. Others leaned back, ready to be amused. The curtain began to rise. As they stepped onto the stage, the bright lights flooded over them. The janitor blinked, momentarily blinded by the glare, while his daughter seemed unaffected, guided only by his hand and her memory of the steps they had rehearsed. The piano stood silently at center stage, its glossy surface reflecting the audience like a distorted mirror. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is she really blind? Why would they allow this? This is going to be embarrassing." The janitor led her to the microphone stand and adjusted it carefully. His hands shook as he did, not from the lights, but from the weight of hundreds of eyes judging them both. He leaned down and whispered, "I'm right here." She smiled, a small, calm smile that seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. As he turned to leave the stage, someone laughed loudly from the back. Another voice followed, mocking, cruel. The janitor felt each sound like a slap. His steps slowed, shame burning his chest. He wanted to disappear into the shadows he usually worked in, where no one looked twice. But before he could fully step away, his daughter spoke into the microphone. "Before I sing," she said, her voice clear, "I just want to say thank you for listening." The room quieted, not out of kindness but curiosity. A blind girl thanking them before they had even heard her. It felt unnecessary, almost pitiful to some. She took a slow breath. The janitor stopped at the edge of the stage, unable to move. His fists clenched at his sides. He felt small, exposed, and painfully aware of his place in that room. Aisha stood still, her face lifted slightly toward the lights she could not see. Inside her chest, her heart pounded, but she remembered her father's voice every night after work. telling her stories, telling her she mattered, telling her that her voice was a gift no darkness could take away. The audience waited, smirks ready, phones raised. No one yet realized that the laughter, the mockery, and the careless cruelty hanging in the air were seconds away from being shattered. And the janitor, standing silently in the shadows, had no idea that this moment, born from humiliation and doubt, was about to change how everyone in that room would see his daughter, and him, forever. The piano's first note floated through the auditorium like a soft breath, almost too gentle to notice. A few people shifted in their seats, expecting the sound to stumble, to fall apart the way they assumed the performance would. Someone near the back coughed loudly, another whispered a joke that earned a quiet snicker. Phones were still raised, fingers hovering, ready to capture embarrassment. Aisha stood still at the microphone. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, her shoulders relaxed. She did not search for the audience with her eyes, she didn't need to. She had learned long ago that the world revealed itself to her in other ways, through sound, vibration, and feeling. The hum of the lights above her head, the faint creak of chairs, the distant echo of her father's breath from the side of the stage, she felt it all. Then she sang. The first note left her lips pure and steady, not loud, not dramatic, but honest. It carried a warmth that cut through the room like a blade through fog. The laughter died instantly, as if someone had reached out and turned it off. A girl in the front row froze mid-smile, confusion flickering across her face. A boy who had been slouched in his chair sat up straight without realizing it. The sound was not just beautiful, it was full. Full of something raw and unpolished that no training could fake. It held the weight of quiet nights, of listening instead of seeing, of learning the world through patience and pain. Each word was clear, pronounced with care, as if Aisha knew that every syllable mattered. The janitor felt his chest tighten. He had heard her sing 1,000 times, while washing dishes in their small kitchen, while folding laundry, while she sat on the edge of her bed tracing melodies in the air with her fingers. But this was different. This was bigger than the walls of their home. This was her voice filling a space that had never made room for people like them. As Aisha moved into the next line, her voice grew stronger, rising with a quiet confidence that surprised even her. The piano followed her lead now, no longer guiding but supporting, as if it understood it was no longer the main voice in the room. In the audience, phones slowly began to lower, not out of disappointment but disbelief. One girl wiped at her eyes, annoyed at herself for the sudden sting of tears. She didn't understand why this was affecting her so deeply, only that it was. A teacher who had been anxiously watching the exits felt her throat close and pressed her lips together, afraid she might cry in front of her students. Aisha sang of light she had never seen, of skies she imagined through descriptions, of hope that refused to be silent even in darkness. Her voice trembled slightly on one note, not from fear, but from emotion, and that small imperfection made it even more real. The room leaned toward her. Every breath she took was deliberate. Every pause carried meaning. The echo of her voice seemed to linger longer than it should have, bouncing off the walls, settling into the hearts of people who had arrived expecting nothing more than entertainment. Near the back row, one of the boys who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably. His face burned, though no one was looking at him. He remembered his joke, the way he had mocked her blindness without thinking twice. Now, the weight of it sat heavy in his stomach. On the side of the stage, the janitor's eyes filled with tears he did not bother to hide. His shoulders shook slightly as memories rushed in, doctors' offices, whispered condolences, people telling him to be strong, as if strength came easily. He remembered holding Aisha as a baby, realizing she wouldn't see his face, wondering if the world would ever be kind to her. And now the same world that had ignored him was silent, listening to his daughter as if she were the only person alive. As the song reached its chorus, Aisha's voice soared. It wasn't loud in a way that demanded attention, it was powerful in a way that commanded it. The sound wrapped around the audience, pressing gently but firmly, leaving no room for doubt or mockery. The melody carried pain, yes, but also resilience, an unspoken message that darkness was not the end of the story. A judge at the front table glanced at the others, eyes wide. He had attended hundreds of performances, heard technically perfect voices that left him unmoved. This was not perfection. This was truth. His pen slipped from his fingers and rolled onto the floor, forgotten. The final verse came softer, almost like a whisper. Aisha leaned slightly closer to the microphone, her voice intimate now, as if she were singing to one person instead of hundreds. The room held its breath. Even the air felt still. Her last note faded slowly, delicately, like the last light of a sunset sinking below the horizon. For a moment, there was nothing. No clapping, no cheering, no sound at all. The silence was not awkward, it was heavy, sacred. People were afraid to break it, afraid that making noise would shatter whatever had just passed through them. Tears slid freely now, no longer hidden. A teacher pressed a hand to her chest. A student stared at the stage, eyes glassy, lips parted in awe. Aisha stood quietly, unaware of the expressions she had caused, sensing only the stillness. Her heart raced. Doubt crept in. Had she done something wrong? Had they hated it? She clasped her hands together tightly, grounding herself. From the shadows, her father took a step forward without realizing it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He felt pride swell inside him so fiercely it almost hurt. Then, slowly, one person stood. Then another. Then another. Chairs scraped against the floor as the audience rose to their feet, not in chaos but in unity. Applause erupted, loud and thunderous, crashing over the stage like a wave. It wasn't polite clapping. It was raw, overwhelming, unstoppable. Aisha flinched slightly at the sudden noise, then smiled when she felt the vibration through the floor beneath her shoes. She didn't need to see them standing. She could feel it. And in that moment, as applause filled every corner of the auditorium, the laughter from earlier felt like a distant memory, small, insignificant, and completely erased by the power of a voice that had turned mockery into meaning. The applause did not fade the way applause usually does. It kept rolling, swelling louder and stronger, as if the room itself had found a voice and refused to be quiet. Hands stung, palms burned, yet no one stopped clapping. Some people shouted words of praise they didn't even remember saying later. Others simply cried, standing there with tears streaming down their faces, overwhelmed by a feeling they could not explain. Aisha stood frozen at the microphone, her smile uncertain now. She could feel the thunder of sound through the stage floor, up her legs, into her chest. It wrapped around her like warmth. Still, a small part of her wondered if this reaction was real or if she was misunderstanding it. Applause had always sounded distant to her, like rain hitting a roof somewhere far away. This felt different, closer, fuller. From the side of the stage, her father pressed a hand to his mouth, his breath coming in shaky bursts. For years, he had trained himself to be invisible. He cleaned floors early in the morning before students arrived. He emptied trash late in the evening when halls were empty. Praise was something other people received. Pride was something he felt quietly, in private. Now, with the entire auditorium standing for his daughter, he felt seen for the first time in his life. The principal was the first to move. He stood, straightening his jacket, his expression transformed from cautious professionalism to something deeply human. He stepped onto the stage, gesturing gently for the applause to soften. It took several seconds before the room finally quieted, though people remained on their feet, unwilling to sit. "Aisha," he said into the microphone, his voice thick, "what you gave us today, it wasn't just a song." Aisha turned slightly toward the sound of his voice, listening closely. "It was courage," he continued. "It was truth. And it was a reminder that talent does not come with conditions." The audience erupted again, though softer this time, like a shared agreement rather than an explosion. The principal turned toward the side of the stage. And to her father, he said, gesturing for the janitor to come forward, "Thank you for believing in her when the world made it hard." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd as eyes turned toward the man in the faded uniform. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay where he was, to let this moment pass without drawing attention to himself. But Aisha reached out her hand, searching the air until her fingers found his sleeve. "Abu," she whispered, smiling, "come." That single word gave him the strength he needed. He stepped onto the stage, his movements awkward, unsure of where to stand. The lights felt harsher now, more exposing. He wiped his face quickly with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the tears he couldn't stop. The principal placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should be proud," he said quietly. "I am," the janitor replied, his voice barely audible. "More than I can say." Someone in the front row began clapping again, slowly, deliberately. Others joined, until the sound built once more, not as loud as before, but just as sincere. This applause was different. It wasn't for a performance anymore. It was for a story, for resilience, for love that had endured every silent insult and every unseen struggle. Aisha felt her father's hand tremble in hers. She squeezed it back, grounding him the way he had grounded her so many times before. In that exchange, there was no audience, no stage, just a father and daughter sharing a moment they would carry for the rest of their lives. When they finally stepped off the stage, the world felt altered. Students who had laughed earlier avoided eye contact, their faces flushed with shame. One girl approached Aisha, hesitantly, her voice small. "You were amazing," she said, as if the word didn't feel strong enough. "I'm sorry." Aisha tilted her head, listening to the sincerity in the girl's tone. "Thank you," she replied simply. There was no bitterness in her voice, no need to punish. Forgiveness came to her as naturally as music. Teachers stopped the janitor in the hallway, thanking him, praising his daughter, speaking to him with a respect he was not used to hearing. Each word felt unreal, like they were meant for someone else. He nodded, smiled politely, unsure how to accept something he had never been offered before. Later that evening, after the auditorium had emptied and the chairs were stacked away, the janitor returned to his usual work. The halls were quiet, echoing only with the sound of his mop against the floor. But the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. Aisha sat on a bench nearby, humming softly, her feet swinging gently above the ground. "Abu," she said, breaking the quiet, "did I really do okay?" He stopped, leaning the mop against the wall. He walked over and knelt in front of her, taking her face gently in his hands. "You didn't just do okay," he said, his voice steady now. "You changed how people see." She smiled, though she did not fully understand what that meant. "I just sang the way you told me to," she said. "With my heart." He laughed softly, a sound that felt new to him. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." Word of the performance spread quickly. Videos appeared online, shared and reshared, accompanied by comments filled with awe and regret. People who had never set foot in that school were moved by her voice, by the image of a blind girl standing fearless under bright lights. Messages of support poured in, offers of music lessons, scholarships, opportunities the janitor had never imagined for his daughter. But that night, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the walk home. The janitor held Aisha's hand as they moved down the familiar streets, the city sounds wrapping around them. For the first time, he walked with his head held high. He no longer felt the need to shrink, to blend into the background. Aisha skipped beside him, light and joyful. "Abu," she said, "do you think I can sing again someday?" He smiled, looking up at the dark sky she could not see. "I think," he said, "the world is going to ask you to." She laughed, her voice ringing clear in the night air. And though she would never see the standing ovation, the tears, or the humbled faces in that auditorium, Aisha had given everyone there a rare gift, the ability to truly see.